Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I do, and we will talk about both of these if you allow, but I do find myself wondering quite how the current government, that's the one with Boris Johnson in it rather than the one with Philip Hammond in it, they're now sworn enemies, in case you weren't keeping up over the weekend, how they get to trumpet policies that are essentially reversals of policies that they introduced and endorsed as cabinet ministers. Speaking about cabinet ministers, my arithmetic, I don't even need my thumbs for this, just 8 fingers will do. My arithmetic tells me that 7 current cabinet ministers plus Boris Johnson did exactly what Boris Johnson is threatening to sack MPs for doing with regard to Theresa May's various attempts to get the so-called withdrawal agreement through Parliament. He, as you know, voted for it and against it. It's so sweet, isn't it? Yeah, for it and against it. Yeah, but will of the people, can't change your mind. Voted for it and against it, despite there being a 3-line whip in place. If anyone dares to defy such a whip tomorrow, then they will be expelled, essentially, from the Parliamentary Conservative Party. So if you do what Boris Johnson did a couple of months ago, Boris Johnson will sack you. OK, where else are we with regard to Brexit? Remember unelected bureaucrats? Ooh, boo, hiss. You remember how awful unelected bureaucrats are? How it's always terrible. They ride roughshod over our Parliament. In fact, our Parliament's not even sovereign. Well, update. Turns out our Parliament was always sovereign, so that was a lie that many still struggle to fully understand. But it turns out, actually, that the people who told you they hated unelected bureaucrats really, really like them. Because there's this funny fella called Dominic Cummings in Downing Street now, lauded as a genius, but this is a government in which Nadine Dorries gets a ministerial position, so I suspect that the definition of the word genius is a little loose in that context. He's in charge, it would appear. He masterminded Vote Leave. That's the organisation that broke the law. And he's now in charge at Downing Street. He's sacking people as well. He got rid of one of Sajid Javid's key advisors just before the weekend. I don't know if you kept up with that story. And then apparently when questioned about it at a meeting of similar advisors, he said it's in much fruitier language than I would ever employ on the radio or indeed elsewhere. It was my way or the highway, seemed to be the thrust of his position. So, make a list of things that they, or you, or we were supposed to care about. We don't like unelected bureaucrats, but we quite like having an unelected bureaucrat so powerful that he's sacking the Chancellor's advisors and threatening dismissal from the parliamentary party to anyone who dares to do what Boris Johnson did when Theresa May was Prime Minister. Well, that's very odd. I know what we like. We want to restore parliamentary authority. We're sick of being pushed around by those... Oh, hang on. Unelected... Foreign unelected bureaucrats. We're sick of it. We want our MPs to be sterling and strong and sovereign. OK, so how does that square with the decision by Boris Johnson at the behest of the unelected bureaucrat Dominic Cummings to fire any MPs who exercise their democratic mandate to exercise their judgment on the single most important issue that the country has faced since 1945. Yeah, we'll just sack them. Oh, OK. So what about parliamentary authority, then? The idea that the UK Parliament has somehow been denuded or deprived of power. It's the role of MPs has been diluted by European Union membership. How are we feeling about that? Well, they've shut Parliament, mate. What? Well, yeah, they're going to shut it. Yeah, they'll send some sort of lick-spittles and forelock tuggers into the studios to claim that it's perfectly normal. But you speak to the head of Hansard, you speak to anybody really who is an unbiased, i.e. not in the pay of the government or newspaper owners desperately hoping to avoid new tax legislation being brought in by the European Union. You speak to anybody outside those two constituencies, and this is a very big deal. This is a constitutional snub on a borderline unprecedented level. Again, never suspended Parliament for this long since 1945. So we need to make our Parliament more powerful and sovereign. Therefore, we're going to suspend it unnecessarily and against the wishes of most members, because I'm reliably informed that they would actually have voted against having a traditional recess over the conference period. Right, we don't like unelected bureaucrats, but we've got one in charge. I'm going to have to start writing this down. It's so hard to keep up. Right, we don't think Parliament has got enough power, so we're suspending it. We don't like unelected bureaucrats, so we've put one in charge. OK. We are sick of having our laws overridden by Brussels, so 2 cabinet ministers this weekend refused to confirm that they would actually obey the law in the event of Parliament passing one. Right. This isn't looking very good, is it? Let's recap again. We don't like unelected bureaucrats, but we've put one in charge of Downing Street. We're worried about Parliament somehow having lost its powers as a result of European Union membership, so we're suspending Parliament. We're sick of having to obey laws that aren't passed by our own Parliament, but we've got Michael Gove and Gavin Williamson in the last 24 hours suggesting that they're prepared not to obey laws that are passed by our Parliament. Government's own research and papers leaked at the weekend shows that the British border in Ireland does not admit a solution, regardless of how many times you've heard people like Rees-Mogg mewling about alternative arrangements and technological solutions. He also told her, I presume it was an error of omission rather than commission, when he claimed that 1 million people had got settled status. The correct figure is 72% of that. But, you know, details. This is a man, in the case of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's prepared to insult a neurologist live on the radio for having the audacity to point out that he actually contributed to the government's plans to deal with something that they're still calling Project Fear. And that is number 5 on today's Brexit chart. Spending £100 million on something, warning people about the impact of something they're still calling Project Fear. So either it's Project Fear or it's something upon which you need to spend £100 million hoping that the public can get their house in order to cope with it. It can't be both, can it? You don't spend £100 million warning people about good things, I don't think. Do you? Take out billboards up and down the country and full-page spreads in newspapers saying, hey, great news, come November the 1st, you're going to be really happy and well off and things are going to improve. I could be wrong. Maybe you do routinely spend huge amounts of money telling people good stuff that they don't need to be told. Or you could, like me, think that you don't spend £100 million on something that constitutes a warning while still sending people like Rees-Mogg around the studios of the country claiming that Project Fear is in play. I mean, it's actually incredible now. So, once again, with feeling. We don't think Parliament has got enough power. It's been diluted by membership of the European Union. We're suspending Parliament. We're sick of our MPs not being able to exercise proper authority because of our membership of the European Union. We're going to sack any that don't do what we want. Who's we? An unelected bureaucrat in Downing Street, the fellow that ran the campaign that broke the law. He's in charge. But we don't like unelected bureaucrats. We do like some unelected bureaucrats. I haven't yet worked out what the difference is between the ones we like and the ones we don't like, but it's got something to do with allowing people to continue to pretend that they haven't dropped an almighty clanger. What question am I going to ask you this morning? 12 minutes after 10 is the time. I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to ask you this morning. I'm going to turn it around because, partly because I can't spend every minute of every show at the moment saying what the hell is going on or what do you think is going to happen next. I see on my screen at the moment people like David Gauke, Nick Bowles, politicians, MPs who are prepared to sacrifice their careers and their ambitions upon the altar of the national interest. Now, how many times have I said to you in the last week that you have to start judging people by their actions, not by the colour of their scarf? You know, I am by tradition not a conservative sympathiser. There are elements of conservatism that repel me. There are elements of it that attract me, but I am not a conservative sympathiser or supporter at this point in British political history, which means it should count double when I say these men and women are behaving with absolute loyalty to the national interest. They genuinely believe, passionately believe, that the country's welfare is more important than their ambitions or their careers. And these, in many cases, will be people that wanted nothing more ever in their lives than to be members of Parliament and even members of government. They are now prepared to sacrifice all of that upon the altar of what they perceive to be the national interest. John Major is prepared to take a Prime Minister from his own party to court in order to defend his countrymen and women. Now, that's the question I've got for you. If you would normally be one of the people spluttering, I don't think we are anymore, are we? I mean, you can't be cross with me anymore because I gave you everything you needed to be ready for what's happening now. You appreciate it. There's a little bit of discomfort in admitting it, but if you were one of the people who screamed blue bloody murder at me when I suggested that no deal was a big possibility, now that it is close to concluded, you should really be saying thank you. I don't need gratitude. I just want your answers to this question, okay? What do you think motivates them? Or us, me, even. Tony Blair, John Major, that neurologist who rang Jacob Rees-Mogg on Nick's show earlier, Gina Miller, whoever it may be. Because we've spent a huge amount of time trying to work out what motivates the other side. You've got the new directives coming in on tax that will very, very directly affect tax-avoiding newspaper owners. You've got, of course, vanity. You've got English exceptionalism. You've got racism. You've got fears of immigration. There's a million reasons. We know what motivates them. What motivates them now is just pride, inability of admitting a mistake. But what do you as a leaver thinks motivates the so-called other side? That's the bit I've never quite got my head around. Why would a neurologist not tell the truth? Why would the Road Haulage Association not tell the truth? 2-day delays, it's suggested this morning. I think that's government research, its own paperwork that's been leaked. Why would they do that? I mean, apart from a profound and sincere belief that we will be harming people on a scale never undertaken voluntarily in human history, apart from a profound and sincere belief that this is a really dangerous and stupid thing to do, what do you think motivates all the people you've been encouraged by the Daily Telegraph and the Sun and the Daily Mail to despise? What do you think puts lead in our collective pencils? What fuels our engines? I'd really, really like to know. And, I mean, I can reserve the right to debate and dispute with you, but if it's your sincere belief, I can't tell you it's not, can I? It'd be a shame if all you've got is sort of George Soros checks or some nonsense like that, but it would be indicative of just how corrupt our media has become, the fact that you can somehow arrive at that conclusion unchallenged in the current landscape. But that's what I want from you this morning. It might not work, you might not fancy it. You might actually answer the question in your own head and then think, crikey, I'm never going to say that live on the radio. I sound like an absolute flump. But I'd really like to try. And so pick a favourite, Gina Miller. Gary Lineker, if you want. Me, if you really want to scrape the bottom of the barrel. But more obviously, David Gork, Rory Stewart, Anna Soubry, Ken Clarke. Why? Why is Tony Blair putting his head back above the parapet this morning? Why did John Major do so last week? So out of a profound and sincere concern for the country. But you don't. So what do you think it is? I would really, really love to know. And if I'm not tempting you to ring in yet, then I'll try the opposite approach. I'll try a bit of a poke rather than a polite invitation. I don't think you've got a clue. You've not even stopped to wonder. Why are these people risking their personal safety in some cases? Gina Miller has seen one man jailed for threats levelled at her. Anna Soubry's answer phone tape is unbelievable in its toxicity. Why are they doing this? 0345 6060 973. If not, out of concern for you. And I should have kept that piece from the Mail on Friday of last week where it listed us all in our technicolor glory, all of these people who remain persuaded that the country is embarked upon a path of abject lunacy. If you need proof of that, then if you're still cheering for Brexit, you have to explain why it's good to have unelected bureaucrats in charge, why it's good to suspend Parliament so that it can't scrutinise and hold government accountable, and it's good to sack MPs if they don't do what the government wants. All of those things, polar opposite of what you were told you were voting for. So what motivates people on the other side still? After 3 and a bit years. Speaking personally, I thought we'd have shut up about this. I thought there would have been some sort of thing that came along that allowed us to go, all right, I still don't think it's perfect. I'm not persuaded it's better than what we currently have, but it's not that bad, so let's just crack on and get on with it. Hand on heart, I'd have done that. If I had a time machine and I was an MP, I'd have been tempted to vote for the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May put before Parliament if I'd known then that we would have. I mean, it's a bit like threatening somebody with your own absurdity. And I don't think any of us quite believed that a British Prime Minister would actually countenance crashing out with no deal. Boris Johnson's entire mission is to persuade people he is perfectly bonkers enough to do that, and I believe him. I wouldn't say bonkers, I'd say completely selfish and uncaring. So how have we ended up here? Why are people still exposing themselves to abuse, death threats, insults, horrible, horrible treatments, if not because they genuinely care for the country? I haven't got another explanation, but maybe you have. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Ken is in Hale Zone. Why do you think they're doing it, Ken?
Good morning, James. Let me put my position into some kind of perspective.
Did you just have a crack at answering the question first? Why do you think...
Yes, I will do,
good.
but it's important that you know... Hold on. I was a leaver.
Okay.
A Remainer.
Of course you were.
Strong Remainer.
Yes.
Absolutely distraught when we came out.
Yes.
And now I've sort of moved a bit over to the other side.
Right.
Now, the comment that tempted me to phone you is the thought that Tony Blair would stick his head above the parapet for the benefit of moi, for the benefit of me, just beggars belief.
Well, it wouldn't just be you, Ken. It'd be the country that he was elected to lead on 3 separate occasions, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I know. He sticks his head above the parapet because...
Well, OK, well, let's leave him out. Let's leave him out of it, then. Let's talk about John Major or Gina Miller. What do you think motivates all of these people to expose themselves... Hang on, I haven't finished. To expose themselves to precisely the sort of feelings and words that you've just described yourself suffering from. So why do you think they do it?
Anybody who has a deep belief will expose themselves to ridicule from people who happen to have an opposite opinion.
But you don't have an opposite opinion. You voted to remain.
I voted to remain. But
so you said, yes. So what do you think? What do you think motivates all of these people who are talking about? I mean, the Road Haulage Association. Why would the government not be telling the truth to the government about delays at Dover or the British border in Ireland?
Why do you think Mark Francois sticks his head above the parapet and argues the other side?
Well, because he's desperate for attention and not very bright. But I asked you the question first.
OK, well, let me apply the same ridiculous statement to Tony Blair. He's not very bright.
Right.
I mean, you can't just... James, you're in a privileged position.
I don't want to talk about me today, Ken. You haven't answered my question yet. What motivates... Mate, you're supposed to be... You voted to remain, remember?
What motivates them is their belief in that we should remain.
And why do they believe that?
Because, well, why do you believe we should remain?
Because I think that leaving will be disastrous, and I have got pages and pages of evidence to support that position. Same as you, because you voted to remain, Ken, remember?
Hold on. Other people don't believe that.
And they don't have pages and pages of evidence. So the question again is, James,
it's no good you're constantly trying to overtalk me.
I'm not overtalking you, Ken. I'm insisting that you answer the question you've rung in to answer.
I've answered the question. OK, you've asked me the question. What was the question? Why do they have a belief? Because they believe in remaining. That's why.
And why? No, you have to go further than that. What are they basing their belief on, Ken?
So when I say to you, Mark Francois...
What are they basing their... Yes, OK, well, I'll ask you then. I will do. What does Mark Francois base his beliefs on?
OK, I'm asking you.
Oh, Ken.
Why does Mark Francois get in front of the cameras and argue the opposite?
I've already told you.
I'll answer the question
because he doesn't understand anything.
You can't just ridicule one person.
Of course I can. And I would never dream of ridiculing one person. I ridicule several people every day. And I've got a horrible feeling I'm going to have to ridicule you unless you can answer this question. What evidence does Mark Francois base his beliefs on?
All kinds of evidence he's collected over the years. He's not an idiot.
Go on then.
What about Jacob Rees-Mogg then?
Well, we started with Mark Francois. We can move on if you want. But first, tell me what's the favourite evidence Mark Francois has cited in defence of what you call his beliefs?
I'm asking you that question.
Oh, no, you're not, Ken. You're not. I've already answered it. I don't think he understands anything. So you think he's right.
Anybody who's listening to the radio right now will see you're prevaricating, as you always do, trying to avoid answering a question.
Which question's that, Ken?
Let me... Just give me a second, OK? You're asking me why Tony Blair, John Major, people like that, subject themselves to abuse and ridicule to put forward an argument that they believe in. Now, I'm saying exactly the same to you from the other side.
Except you're not, because you're ignoring the word evidence.
No, I'm just... No, forget evidence.
I refuse to forget evidence, Ken. I'm sorry if you feel that I'm talking over you again, but we can't forget evidence.
You are so verbally agile.
No, I am verbally agile, Ken. You're right, but I'm also asking you a very simple question. Where's the evidence for what Marc Francois believes?
Where's the evidence for what John Major believes?
Well, you've got Operation Yellowhammer. You've got most of the Royal Colleges of Medicine. You've got the government.
You've ridiculed Operation Yellowhammer.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
You have?
No, I haven't.
Play some of your recordings back.
No, I won't, Ken, because it'd be boring for everybody else. But you've asked me, Ken, you can't keep doing this. You keep asking a question. I answer it. Oh, Ken, this is awful, mate. I'm not trying to talk over you, Ken.
You can press your button to switch me off any time you choose.
Well, exactly, and I didn't, did I? So why mention that?
As long as I'm on here, I'm going to ask my question.
Go on, Ken. Ask it again.
If you apply a bit of balance and ask the same question...
But I just answered your question.
The other side, you're asking the question, why do they put the head above the parapet?
Yes.
I'm saying exactly the same.
No, but you're not, are you, mate? Are you? Right, Ken, I'm going to pause you now, because I've let you had a good old run out, and no, Ken, just calm down, my friend. Yes, I have. I have. Let's just run over it again, okay? I asked you what evidence he has for his beliefs, and you said in what I think you consider to be balance, what evidence is there for the other beliefs? To which I would respond by saying all of the research, all of the impact assessments undertaken by both the last government and the previous government. If we were to talk about, for example, delays at Dover, I would say the documents leaked today from the current government. Operation Yellowhammer, dated as research undertaken for and by the current government. So the evidence for the beliefs of everybody from John Major and Tony Blair through to Anna Soubry and Gina Miller, the evidence is the research undertaken not just by disinterested bodies like the Road Haulage Association, but by the actual government. So I've answered your question now at great length. I think out of courtesy, you should now answer mine. What evidence do you think Marc Francois has for his beliefs, Ken?
What I should ask you, what you said that Marc Francois was an idiot. When I said, what about, did you or didn't you?
Yes, I think he is an idiot, mate. I don't think that's controversial. So now I'm asking you to Ken, where's the evidence? Ken, just mate, I've done it. We've run through it all now 1,000 times. Ken, we've run through it 1,000 times. I've answered your question. I've given you where the evidence comes from. Where does Marc Francois get the evidence for his beliefs? Fill your boots.
Somebody else. You think you can talk out an argument all the time.
Yes.
If your argument is strong enough, you'd shut up and you'd bloody well listen.
I have.
I'm going to take
the evidence?
Of curtailing my discussion with you.
But you complained a minute ago. You complained a minute ago that that's what I do.
You cannot answer the question.
Where's the evidence?
I think your question is a reasonable one. I'm answering it by choosing to say...
Yes?
Ask it of the other side.
I have. They say Operation Yellowhammer, they say the Road Haulage Association, they say the impact assessments. What do you say?
Well, I'm saying purely for the purpose of balance.
Yes,
what I'm saying.
So balance out the evidence, Ken. Here's lots and lots of evidence. Where's your balanced evidence?
Your arguments would be so much stronger.
Oh,
honestly,
okay.
you're a very articulate bloke. I'm not patronising you, but your arguments would be so much stronger if you just applied a tad of balance.
I am. So in order to balance,
yes,
here we go, Ken. You see, you're shouting over me while accusing me of doing the same to you. You're threatening to cut yourself off while accusing me of threatening to cut you off. Here we go. I listened to Nick this morning. Ken, here's the question. Here's the question.
Listen to his balance.
Okay.
He's clearly right-wing, but he has balance.
Well, how do you know that if he's balanced?
I beg your pardon?
How do you know that if he's balanced?
Because I hear him putting both sides of the argument.
Well, how do you know he's clearly right-wing?
How do I know you're clearly left-wing?
Well, you're drawing a contradiction between the two of us.
No, I'm not.
Ken, you actually are, mate.
As you always do.
As you always do, you're making me feel silly. Right, I'm late for the news. Final chance. I've given you all of the reasons, all of the evidence for why people believe that crashing out of the European Union with no deal would be disastrous. Most of the evidence comes from the actual government that's doing it. I want you to give me one little scintilla of evidence that you think supports the beliefs of people like Mark Francois. And this is balance, Ken. This is your big opportunity. This, in the words of Martine McCutcheon, could be your perfect moment. How would you balance out, just off the top of my head, Operation Yellowhammer? Where's the evidence? Where's the documentation? Where's the expertise? Over to Ken in Halesowen now.
In general terms, I'm telling you, or I'm requesting you, as a respected broadcaster, to apply a bill of balance.
Yes, go on then. Provide it.
As I recall, you didn't last on Newsnight very long because you didn't apply balance.
No, Ken, I had to leave Newsnight in order to keep telling the truth to people like you. So, final chance, that balance that you crave, where's the evidence, Ken? 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 Oh. Well, that's a new record, isn't it? Complain about the threat of being cut off, and then 4 minutes later, cut yourself off. And all potential solutions to the post-Brexit Irish border are fraught with difficulty and would leave smaller businesses struggling to cope, experts have said, as leaked government papers outline major concerns just 2 months before Britain is due to leave the EU. That's leaked government papers, just like Operation Yellowhammer, which Michael Gove dishonestly described as having been out of date. A fib, a lie to the British public. Similarly, with delays at Dover now being mooted in worst-case scenarios as being 2 days long. All of this is coming from interested bodies, from experts, and in many cases from the government. So I ask you for the evidence to support what people like Tony Blair, John Major, David Gauke, Dominic Grieve, Anna Soubry are arguing, and the evidence is being provided by the actual government. This is where things get truly surreal, isn't it? Where's your evidence for what you're claiming? Well, it's been undertaken, it's been demonstrated by government research that has been leaked. Unelected bureaucrat Dominic Cummings made it very clear very early that anyone who leaks stuff will be sacked. That got leaked. That's the unelected bureaucrat Dominic Cummings, who's already sacked one of Sajid Javid's key advisors, reportedly in person. So the best case scenario, we'll see lorries waiting for 2 to 3 hours each. About half of them will be waiting for at least 8 hours. This is a new analysis. Government documents drawn up in the last fortnight. Okay, so that's the evidence for one side. You believe that it's wrong. Where's your evidence? 0345 606 0973. Jacob Rees-Mogg, even by his standards, despicable conduct on the radio this morning. A neurologist who has contributed to the mitigation plans for the impact of a no-deal Brexit, insulted roundly live on the radio by Jacob Rees-Mogg. I think we'll have a listen to it, actually, because, it's incredible. It also demonstrates he doesn't understand what the word mitigation means, because you only have to mitigate against negative impacts, right? But he still says there won't be any negative impacts and that's all Project Fear. So not only are we spending £100 million on something that he told you would be great, that's just warning about this thing he told you would be great. We also need to mitigate against it even though there isn't going to be any negative impact. I mean, it's insane now, but it's funny.
Morning, David.
My name's Dr. David Nicol. I'm a consultant neurologist. I was actually involved in Yellowhammer and drafting the plans of mitigation for a no-deal Brexit in March. My question to you, really, having been involved in writing the plans of mitigation and having whistleblown because I felt they were unsafe, is what level of mortality rate are you willing to accept in the light of a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I don't think that there's any reason to suppose that a no-deal Brexit should lead to a mortality rate. I think this is the worst excess of Project Fear, and I'm surprised that a doctor in your position would be fear-mongering in this way on public radio.
Can I remind you, I wrote the plans of mitigation.
In mitigation? Well, you didn't write very good plans if you hadn't worked out how to mitigate, had you? It's fortunate they're being written by other people now who are serious about mitigating rather than Ramona's.
Well, except to stop you there, in the Sunday Times yesterday, the Royal Colleges who were involved in contact with Department of Health have not yet been approached.
I think it's deeply irresponsible, Dr. Nicol, of you to call in and try and spread fear across the country. I think it's typical of Remainer campaigners, and you should be quite ashamed, I'm afraid.
Gosh. So the people who are writing the new stuff, according to leaked government papers, have concluded that all possible potential solutions to the post-Brexit border in Ireland are fraught with difficulty and would leave smaller businesses struggling to cope. The people writing the new documents have concluded that all lorries coming through Dover are going to be looking at 2 to 3 hours. Half of them could be 8 hours, some of them as much as 2 days. So I don't get it anymore. You know, people like Ken in Halesowen, bless him, ringing up to get very, very cross about the fact that Marc Francois is not being treated with the respect he clearly deserves, ask for reasons why he should be, and the poor fella hangs up. So where's the evidence to support the idea that this is good? And then, apart from all the evidence to support the idea that it's bad, here's the crucial question. What do you think motivates people like, and I'll use a Conservative and a Labour Prime Minister, because that seems to me to be a fairly broad church, or historically it would. Why are they doing this? They're wealthy, retired men. They don't need to do any of this. Why are they? And between them, of course, they've won 4 elections more than Boris Johnson. So why are they doing this, in your view? Ideally as a leaver, and I mean a genuine leaver, not someone who voted Remain and then changed his mind due to the intellectual ministrations of Marc Francois. Ian's in Watford. Ian, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
On this lovely sunny day.
Isn't it glorious?
Yes. Let me just run through it. I think that without doubt, particularly John Major, is 100% genuine, they're sincere. But that one of your problems with that is not going to bring your country back together again.
It's not going to butter any parsnips, is it?
No, and that's the issue that I have. And as somebody who did vote Brexit with a real questioning heart, because I think I've spoken to you before, I voted because I didn't think it would actually go to Brexit, but I thought it may create some form of change in the EU, which does need updating.
Yes.
We have reviews into so many things. How many reviews have we had for whether we should use it, extend Heathrow, the HS2?
I don't know how much that's got to do with the EU. I don't want to digress unduly.
No. It's the issue of the fact nobody seems to have done a review of where the EU stands and what is the benefit. Hello?
I'm listening to you.
Yeah, sorry, there's a click on the line.
Oh, it's all right, sorry. Probably can.
Whether the EU itself needs to be changed.
Oh, well, I don't dispute any of that, but we're not. That debate's 3 years old, and I think.
Let me just finish what I'm saying.
I will, but it's 10:44. We're going to run out of time, and I haven't answered my question yet.
The question is, how do you bring people together? Now, I would be happy to vote to remain now,
of course, subject
to the fact that there would be a serious effort to update the EU.
Well, you know what that involves, don't you?
It needs. You have to be in there, and you have to.
Yes, and also you have to respect the institution. You have to send good people there, not sort of just flotsam and jetsam and flipping Widdicombe. We need to send people who are the creme de la creme of our multilingual political establishment.
Are you going to put yourself forward?
I don't have
James?
the languages.
Right, no, but it is something that. That's the minimal difference between where we are now.
With love and respect, you are a sensible leaver, right? So you think that there are rational ways to progress. You heard the last caller. There is nothing sensible about people shouting about beliefs and getting cross when they're asked for evidence.
Absolutely.
So how do we do that? How do we deal with that? And then you ask the question of why do you think the other side do what they do? And they have to say, because they're exactly the same as us. They just believe something different. Don't mention evidence. Don't mention leaked reports. Don't mention Yellowhammer. Don't mention the Irish border. Don't mention impact assessments. Don't mention the government's own commissioned research. And whatever you do, don't mention the fact that the unelected bureaucrat in Downing Street is threatening to sack MPs for doing exactly what Boris Johnson did to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Thank you, Ian. For the record, I actually believe you when you say that you voted leave. Brexit is a class divide. Working class want to leave and middle class wish to remain. It's a very good point from an unsigned texter. Nothing says working class like owning the Ritz and paying Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage to write columns for your newspaper. Yeah, that's it. It's just practically John Lennon. That's who he had in mind when he wrote Working Class Hero, the owner of the Daily Mail, Rupert Murdoch and the Barclay brothers. Come on, mate. 10:49 is the time. Why are they doing it? These people that you, as a genuine bona fide leaver, you despise these people. You've been conditioned to despise them, or I might even be immodest enough to say to despise us. Been conditioned to despise Gina Miller, you know? Been conditioned to despise people whose party, until relatively recently, you supported. People like David Gauke, people like John Major, people like Dominic Grieve. Why are they doing this? On what possible planet does it make sense for them to endanger their personal safety, compromise their career prospects, in many ways dash their own dreams? Not for those of us on the outside of Parliament, but for those on the inside. Threatened with the sack now, threatened with having the whip withdrawn if they dare to do to Boris Johnson what Boris Johnson did and 7 members of his cabinet did to Theresa May. It's so, what's the word? Sort of, well, I'm just going to go for a simple word like huge. The evidence on one side that things are really, really ugly is immense. The evidence on the other side that this is a really, really good idea is so non-existent that they're spending £100 million to prepare you for it while claiming that it's good. Just think about that. That one simple thing, 100 million quid. How many nurses is that? About 3,000? How many police officers is that? You know, the stuff the right-wing media pretends to care about when it's wanging on about foreign aid or unemployment benefits. 100 million quid on preparing you for something that they told you would make you richer. Don't get it. And then when one of the doctors charged with preparing the country for this entirely self-inflicted damage has the decency and the patriotism to phone a national radio station in the hope of talking to Jacob Rees-Mogg insults him. Quite incredible. Imagine using language like Ramona and Project Fear after 3.5 years, or 3 and a bit years, of an open goal into which all you had to do was slot one ball, one tangible benefit, one measurable improvement, one genuine enhancement of our national situation, and you got nothing. Howard's in Fleet. Howard, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Yes. Simple answer to your question. They're doing it because they believe that a no-deal Brexit is an irreversible mistake and will lead to probably not an overnight disaster, but to a gradual and progressive degradation and deterioration.
We need a better word than believe, don't we? We need a better word than believe, because you see, someone like Canning Hales Owen thinks that when you say believe, it means it's somehow intellectually equivalent to. Yeah. I'm not patronising the fella, but I mean, he genuinely thinks that Mark Francois' beliefs carry the same weight as Mark Carney's.
Can I just say I listened to your conversation with Ken, and first point is I think you need a medal. Second point is you're dealing with a religious believer here. I think one has to...
Well, hang on, he voted Remain, remember?
Yeah, he's a convert, and there's nothing worse than a convert, perhaps. No, the evidence is that we will not benefit by leaving. We had the best deal when we were members.
And that's it, isn't it, Howard? That's the thing that no one can admit. The elephant on the Brexit side of proceedings, the elephant in the room is that there was never anything better on the table. The whole thing was a mess or a misapprehension.
I'm retired. I'm a retired university lecturer in economics, and it's all about uncertainty. I voted to remain because I just thought it would be an increase without any demonstrable benefit in increasing uncertainty. And uncertainty is detrimental to everything.
Yes.
And quite honestly, if I might just say this, I believe the only explanation that can fit all of the facts, or even most of the facts, is that Brexit is a function of Boris's insane ambition to be Prime Minister. He decided to go for Brexit. Remember, he wrote 2 articles, one for, once against. He decided to go for Brexit because it was the only way to get rid of Cameron. Then he got rid of May. Now he's in office, and we get all the rubbish about, it's me or Corbyn, or, everybody else is to blame. It's just for Boris to remain in number 10. I can't tell you how much I despise the man.
Well, I think you just did. I dispute one element of your analysis in that the decision to back leave was not designed to get David Cameron out of office. It was designed to position Boris Johnson in pole for when David Cameron, as he'd already revealed he would do, stepped down. It would have been probably Johnson versus Osborne, and Johnson would have had the Leave-supporting rump of the party on side, despite the fact that he, as he calculated, they wouldn't actually have won the referendum. It's why him and Gove looked so terrified on the morning immediately afterwards. Thank you, Howard. 10:55 from Andy in Morden. In 2016, I donated a kidney to my wife. She now needs to take drugs every day, otherwise the kidney will reject, and the whole thing will have been a waste of time. The drugs are manufactured in the Netherlands. If there is even the slightest risk that there will be delays at the ports in November, I tend to think that's not a risk worth taking. Perhaps Ken or someone could explain why the government is prepared to take this risk. And also, perhaps, Jacob Rees-Mogg could explain why anyone trying to stop the government from taking this risk faces getting sacked, or the Parliament that would ordinarily and historically and constitutionally and traditionally be charged with stopping the government from unnecessarily or inflicting harm upon the country. That would be Parliament's job. But they suspended Parliament. Mark's in Fulham. Mark, what do you think motivates all of these people who are waking up every morning at the moment to find enormous targets painted on their back by right-wing newspapers?
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, great. I mean, I think the basis of their decision to do that is based on having the information in which to do so. I mean, I'm just an average layman in this sort of overall situation.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, when it came to vote, I wanted to vote, but I never got round to actually doing it. But to do so, I would have voted to leave.
Yes.
But I'm saying that, like most of the country, all our votes were made on the lack of information. And like yourself, you're saying you've got all these documented documents in front of you which help you to make a valid sort of decision.
Only after, mate, in case you're beating yourself up, I was like you before the vote. I didn't know any of this stuff.
Well, there you go. This is my point exactly. Yeah. And, these politicians who we're mentioning now have got the documentation in front of them, can make a valid sort of view. And at the end, can anyone? What percentage of the country can make a valid view?
Well, that's where the experts traditionally come in, isn't it? That's where when you want to find out about perhaps impacts on medical services, you go to a consultant neurologist.
Really? I mean, aren't you allowed to take an average point of view with a sort of educated view?
Well, it depends what's on. It depends whether you're talking about rocket science or whether you're talking about importing oranges, doesn't it? So if you find two importers of...
This is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. I don't think it is rocket science. I think...
So how would you solve the Irish border problem, the British border in Ireland?
I don't think that's easily solved. I think that is an issue that's come with the mix-up. I mean, if
it was easily predictable, that was actually predictable.
The main basis of the argument right now, or the issue, should we say, it's not an argument. The issue is: should there be another referendum or not? And I think that if it was given another referendum, with a valid sort of information given to us,
yes.
And I mean us as a nation,
yes, I know
to make a view, there would be a different point of view. I mean, we've where most of my information has come from, these valid conversations that you've had on this station.
Well, I'm glad, and then I'm going to very arrogantly suggest that if there was another referendum, you probably wouldn't be minded to vote leave this time.
Absolutely. I'm really tended to feel, well, hold on a minute, I'm hearing so many different things which are more factual than I've ever heard from the government.
Yeah. I'm flattered that you feel that way, but all of the stuff I've cited this morning has actually come from the government. They just didn't want you to know about it. They didn't want it to... It had to be leaked.
Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm disturbing you there for interrupting you. I mean, look, that goes to the point exactly.
It does, doesn't it? So why can you see it? Why can you see it? And let's not be rude, and I won't mention him again in the next hour because I'm always uncomfortable with reverse filleting contributors and callers. But it's so clear to you. Why can't Ken see what you can see, or people like Ken?
I think they can.
Right.
I think that is it their job, and how do they get the information to the people? I would have thought initially, that we was going to get some kind of document in the letterbox.
Well, they can't. I guess they can't, because for the key players who are now in the cabinet, it would involve admitting that they were wrong, to be kind, or that they lied, to be accurate, back in 2016, and in some of their cases, going back 30 years. Mark, what a lovely call. Thank you so much. Hello. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're probably going to talk a bit more about Brexit. I suspect that won't come as a major shock to anybody. Stories I'm also drawn to today include pay rises for teachers and Airbnb. I don't know how familiar you are with Airbnb. It's a website. I'm going to explain it, even if you are completely familiar. It's a website that lets people essentially let out their homes or parts of their homes or properties that they own, and you sort of cut out the middleman. And I had a chat with a B&B owner in Italy this month, and he described it as potentially ripping the heart out of his industry. And there's a couple of other stories around today suggesting it may not be quite the magic bullet for holidaymakers that we used to think it was. I'm drawn to that story, if we have time, and you have the inclination. I'd love to have a slightly longer look at it. But perhaps more importantly, the Labour Party has set its sights on buy-to-let landlords, subject strangely close to my heart for reasons that very long-time listeners will understand, but which I'm a little uncomfortable returning to. So that's all on the agenda. Before that, we continue to ask this question. Gina Miller has seen one of her critics jailed for the toxicity of his threats. Those of us possessed of incredibly thick skins are comfortable being coated regularly by right-wing newspapers, but for normal people, that would be quite a horrible experience. What motivates today Tony Blair, on Friday John Major, to continue fighting against Brexit? If you think it's a good idea, what do you think motivates them? It's a fascinating question that we probably should have asked more recently. Mayor of London Sadiq Khan is in Warsaw at the moment, trying to foster friendships with mayors in a country whose economy is going great guns, relatively speaking, in the context of the rest of the European Union at the moment. He also wrote a rather good article for yesterday's Observer about the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of a Second World War, and fears that some of the lessons of that era have been forgotten or ignored by members of the modern political establishment. But that's not why he's on the line. He's on the line because he has written to every MP in the capital to urgently ask them to do whatever it takes to stop a no-deal Brexit. What will that involve, Sadiq Khan, and why have you done it?
Good morning. Well, in London, we're lucky. We've got, I'll say that genuinely, we've got 73 members of Parliament, and they represent different parts of London, but also different political parties. What I've said to colleagues is, look, I appreciate we all belong to different political parties. We have different tribal allegiances. Let's put aside any differences we have on a whole host of issues, and let's work together to avoid what I think most independent experts agree upon will be a catastrophic no-deal situation if we leave Brexit with no deal whatsoever. And that means, frankly speaking, when Parliament returns, and before she's shut down by this Prime Minister, seeing if we can use legislation to avoid a catastrophic no-deal situation on the 31st of October. What would that look like? Well, I'm not giving away secrets, so I've discussed these with colleagues, but what's already been in the press, and I've discussed this with Keir Starmer and others, is using what's called Standing Order 24 to persuade the Speaker to hold an emergency debate in Parliament and then have a bill or an amendment to a bill that extends Article 50. It could be until a deal is done. It could be to take steps to sit over the weekend to bring about changes in Parliament. So there's a number of options that MPs are currently working on. And the key thing I've said to colleagues in London is, look, we've done this independent research last year, which shows that the very worst form of Brexit is a no-deal Brexit. It will lead to a decade's worth of lost jobs, growth and prosperity. So let's work together to avoid that happening. What, 8 minutes after 11 is the time. What do you say to people furiously opposed to this course of action, people who are still citing the, quotes, will of the people, end quotes, or in the case of Jacob Rees-Mogg this morning while insulting a consultant neurologist who contributed to the medical parts of Operation Yellowhammer, calling them Ramonas? Look, I can't find examples of leading Brexiteers during the campaign talking about the possibility of leaving the EU without a deal whatsoever. In fact, we were told during the campaign that this would be the easiest deal in history.
Yes, but you're being disingenuous. You know, I'm talking, Sadiq Khan, about people who, regardless of what happened in the run-up to that vote in the referendum, they claim now that this is what they wanted.
Well, we had a conversation last week about the problems of politicians being called out when they tell a lie. But it's just not the case. And if that is the case, why are you scared of the legislature testing this in Parliament? And one of the great things about our country, and I'm in Poland now, by the way, who look upon us with envy, is we've got the executive in the form of the government, the Prime Minister. We've got the legislature in the form of the Commons and the Lords. We've got the judiciary in the form of the judges. They love the fact that we've got this separation of powers, these checks and balances. We've got a situation in our country, and I want you to just think about this, where the Prime Minister is shutting down the legislature, and then the judges are being called enemies of the state. And that's what we've come to. And so when people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and others call me a Ramona, damn right I'm going to moan about Parliament being shut down. Damn right I'm going to moan about independent judges being called enemies of the state. Damn right I'm going to moan about making sure the public is aware of the consequences of a no-deal Brexit. And damn right I'm going to work with MPs of all parties and people in civic society and broadcasters and members of the public and journalists and others to avoid what I think is a catastrophic no-deal Brexit.
Well, I mean, when will we know if it does unfold as you fear, and in the immediate short term, touch wood, things won't be as bad as the worst case scenarios predict? I mean, when would you expect the pendulum to start swinging back? When would you expect? I mean, you might be waiting a very long time for people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson to admit that they've made a mistake. But for ordinary people or for respectable politicians, when would you put a time scale on it?
I think that would happen very soon. I genuinely think. Yeah, look, there'll be whether you're a Brexiteer or a Remainer, I think people expect some turbulence after, if we do leave on the 31st of October, after the 1st of November. I'll give you one example of turbulence. We've heard in the last few days of examples of real human beings in our city, in our country, who are EU citizens, yes, who've been refused secure settled status. Now, listen, there are 3.3 million EU citizens in our country. If just 10%, and I'm being very generous here, if just 10% have a glitch or a problem, that's 330,000 people in our country. In London, 1 million EU citizens, that's 100,000 people. So that's one example of the turbulence. And I tell you what, even if you're the editor of one of these newspapers who are calling for Brexit, no-deal Brexit, even if you're the editor of a paper who calls judges enemies of the people, you must know people, whether they're your au pair, whether they're your cleaner, whether they're the person who serves you in the restaurant, who will be suffering as a consequence, and it will affect you. And that's why I think it will happen sooner rather than later. I'm hoping, by the way, we can avoid that. This isn't Project Fair. This isn't me trying to scaremonger people. This is the reality of where we are now. And by the way, literally 4 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was saying, when he was running to be Prime Minister, there was 1 in a million chance of a no-deal Brexit. And members of his cabinet, 7 members of his cabinet, were saying shutting down Parliament was unacceptable. And that's the difference that's happened in just 4 or 5 weeks. So that's my point about politics is moving fast, and I think the consequences of a no-deal Brexit will be seen very soon.
Sadiq Khan, finally, my colleague Nick Ferrari, who you may have heard of, has launched a campaign this morning to equip frontline officers with tasers should they so desire, a sort of more routine application than is currently in place. Would you like to offer your support to that?
Well, I offer my support to the advice given to me by the Commissioner of the Met Police Service and experts. I don't play to a gallery or play to an audience. So my response to that is that in the police service now, there are more officers who are trained to use a taser and have a taser than any time in history. It's gone from, roughly speaking, 4,000 to above 6,000. We also have a number of trained armed officers. And so the advice from my commissioner is, we couldn't afford to have the time off the officers need to be trained. There's 30,000 officers, but also the cost of the tasers. But actually, the advice from the Met Police Service top team, and they're experts, by the way. Their job isn't broadcasters.
But there are three chief constables who are supporting this campaign.
And by the way, those chief constables and those police forces don't have a situation where every police officer carries a taser. And so my point is this: it's what we've got in London, and what those other police forces have is trained officers with tasers. By the way, tasers are really, really useful and really valuable. And those officers that are trained in tasers use them really well. We have a situation where most officers, when they respond to an incident, at least one of the officers will have a taser. And if there isn't a taser, the officers can respond very swiftly. But until I receive advice from the experts, that means the Commissioner and her top team, that she's reached the view that all 30,000 police officers should have a taser all the time, then I'm afraid I can't play to the audience that I'm tempted to do so by the breakfast presenter on LBC.
But if the advice from the Commissioner changed, then your position would change as well.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm the Mayor who has supported the police having more on response teams than ever before. Our police, every single one of them wears a body-worn video, but also having more police officers trained in using the taser than ever before. It's a very valuable tool. There's a distinction between the personal protection of officers, really important to do so, and protecting the public. And recently in London, we had an example of a very brave police officer threatened with a machete, flashed across his face and his neck with a machete. They used his taser to safeguard his own life, but also the life of the public. So I'm not somebody who doesn't appreciate the value of the taser, but I follow the evidence.
Sadiq Khan, many thanks indeed. Speaking of following the evidence, I will take a few more calls on this question. If you can answer it in good faith, because I've given up on penny drop moments. You know I have. It seems to me that the entrenchment is more akin to a sort of, if you walk past a domestic abuse situation and you think as a concerned citizen that you're going to wade in and help the victim, and then, you know, anecdotally and actually really, as I've witnessed this personally, the victim then joins the attacker in attacking the Good Samaritan trying to intervene. That's how Brexit feels to me now from where I sit on the issue. It's you know, people say, how do you retain your patience? How can you be so calm? And the answer is that the people screaming at me, I care about them. You know, I still think that if you're the victim of a con, even if you are married to the con man and still swear blind that you love him to pieces, my job is to point out to you that he's lied. He's got 8 wives in various different parts of the country. And if you're ill, go and see a neurologist, not a haunted pencil. 11:15 is the time. So the question becomes, what do you think motivates these people who right-wing newspaper owners are telling you to despise? John Major, Tony Blair, Gina Miller, David Gork, Anna Soubry, me, Gary Lineker, J.K. Rowling. Why? Why do you think they do it? Leave me out of it, if you want. Oh, goodness knows I'd be comfortable with that. But the rest of them, why are they doing it? 0345 60 60973. And if you can't answer that question, ask yourself how they managed to do this to you. I have spent years unpicking the motivations of people who, I think perfectly understandably and forgivably, believed the claims that leaving the European Union would make us wealthier or healthier, or it would restore parliamentary sovereignty, it would do away with so-called unelected bureaucrats. If any of those things had been true, then the idea of casting a vote to unpick them was perfectly reasonable behaviour that I could have fallen into myself if I did something else for a living. No aspersions, no doubts on that front. But now that we know the NHS was never going to be £350 million a week better off, now that we've got one government minister saying, please don't stockpile food, because if you do, food might run out. You've got explanations of how we might have to airdrop medicines in from beyond the European Union, or to bypass 2-day delays at Dover, coming from leaked government papers, not coming from, you know, enemies of the people, coming from the representatives of the people. And in order to stop Parliament from pointing this out to the government, they've shut Parliament. So now is not the time to ask why on earth people voted for Brexit. I think we've worked that out. Now is the time to ask why people who are still persuaded that this is a good idea, why are they doing what they're doing? Given the, I'll say again, not everyone is as thick-skinned as me. So given the abuse and the vitriol and, of course, the professional threats now being levelled at them, Conservative MPs being warned that they will be expelled from the parliamentary party, they will lose the whip if they do to Boris Johnson what Boris Johnson did to Theresa May. If they do to Boris Johnson what Jacob Rees-Mogg did to Theresa May. If they do to Boris Johnson what Priti Patel and Dominic Raab did to Theresa May. 7 members of the cabinet did to Theresa May what their parliamentary colleagues have been warned will result in the withdrawal of the whip if they dare to do it to Boris Johnson. Just think about that, if nothing else. So what motivates these people who are, in many cases, retired or withdrawn from the fray or in line for no reward or recognition at all for doing this? Why do you think that they're doing it? The only answer is because all of the evidence supports them. But you don't believe that. So what's your answer to that question? 22 minutes after 11. Scott is in Bishop Stortford. Scott, what do you think motivates them?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. My mind is blown at the moment. I don't really subscribe to Leave or Remain. There's arguments on both sides as far as I'm concerned. I don't live in that world of where my happiness is in other people's pockets. But what's blowing my mind as a businessman, and I really love your opinion on this, I'm a big fan of yours, by the way. You've increased my vocabulary like you wouldn't believe.
That's very kind. Thank you.
But what I don't get is when I do a deal with in business, if I'm not prepared to walk out to someone else and use them instead, I have no bargaining power. So for the last 3 years, we've had like 3 aces, but we've been playing like we've had a jack high. And this is, I believe, what Boris is trying to do, is if we don't have if they know we've got to do a deal, they're never going to do a deal that we want, hence why it's been rejected 3 times.
I think I understand you.
Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yes, I do, and I'll try and help. I think there's 2 elements to what you're saying. The first, I think, is easily dealt with. When you are doing a negotiation as a businessman, if you walk away from that negotiation, you walk back to everything that you had before. Right?
Yes.
So that's profoundly different from what we're discussing here, because it's a bit like, and I've used this analogy before, and I'm sure it's not completely foolproof, but I think it works, and I think it will be helpful. It's a bit like if you were negotiating to buy a new car, and your old car is outside in the forecourt, and the keys are in your pocket. So if you don't get the deal that you wanted on the new car, you take your keys out of your pocket, you walk back into the forecourt, you get in your old car and you drive home. What we've done, for good or for ill, by triggering Article 50 when we did, is essentially take our car to the scrapyard next to the dealership, stick it in the crusher, watch it get crushed, and then walk into the dealership to open negotiations for a new car, right? So that's why that analogy is unhelpful. It's nothing like doing a negotiation in business or in any other field, because the status quo has already been destroyed by the referendum result and the early triggering of Article 50.
But now we have to do a deal. You do see...
So that's point one.
The strength, right?
No, because this idea that they are somehow beholden to us, they have one priority. And again, I appreciate that often I'm wasting my breath, but I sense I won't be with you. I didn't understand the importance of the integrity of the 4 freedoms. The more I look at the European Union, the more I look at its genesis in the European Coal and Steel Board and the vision of... Oh, come on. After your compliments, I'm going to have to pluck this. Robert Schuman, a French minister who formed it as a direct instrument with which to resist another European war between France and Germany. The more I understand of its genesis, its inception and its raison d'etre, the more I see why those 4 freedoms are completely indivisible. You can't break them. Once you can't break them, and the British government is determined to leave the single market and or the customs union, and you then factor in the island of Ireland and the border between what will then be 2 separate regulatory frameworks in commercial terms, there's nothing to negotiate. It's over. Well, it's been over since Article 50 was triggered. It's been over since Theresa May announced the red lines. So the withdrawal agreement could have pretended that it wasn't over, because that would have said, well, we'll leave everything as it is until we solve the problem on the island of Ireland. But the people who say it's really easy to solve the problem on the island of Ireland are really, really unhappy with the idea that we'll leave everything as it is until that really easy thing has been done, because they know in their bones it's not easy at all.
Okay, so if they pass a bill that we can't leave without a deal, then we have to accept a deal that no one wants.
Well, the problem with that is, and if we were to go back to brass tacks, the problem with that is the elephant in the room of the Brexit movement, which is there is nothing achievable that is in any way sellable as better than what we had already. Yeah, but I still think, in Boris's defence, not that I'm trying to defend him,
that's what he's trying to achieve.
But I then point out to you that you go back 18 months or further to find the preparation notices that the European Union published in explanation of what it was doing to prepare for no deal. You look at what German foreign ministers said at the end of last week about no deal. You look at what the continental European media is saying about us, and the idea that they don't believe we're prepared to leave with no deal is simply not true. They're astonished that we would be stupid enough to do so, but like most people in this country, they genuinely do believe that the mess has become so acute that we will be stupid enough to do it.
You don't think that they believe the government's going to be overthrown, if that's the right word?
It's going to be what? Overthrown?
Yeah, they're going to take...
No, I don't think Johnson would lose an election at the moment. I think that's a mark of how mad things are. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, whose approval ratings are astonishingly low, unable to defeat even Theresa May. So the idea that he could defeat a newly inflated Boris Johnson, and also because he hasn't nailed his colours to any masts on Brexit, which is something for the historians to judge. But you're still subscribing to this idea. I think we've dealt with this nonsense about you've got to be prepared to walk away in order to get a deal, because we've destroyed the car in which we would.
Not 100%.
Oh, well, give me 80% then. Because they believe us, mate. They believe us. But they're still saying nothing will prompt us to compromise the four freedoms.
You actually think they believe we're going to leave?
Yeah, of course they do. There is, I mean, there is absolutely no...
I get the impression they still fancy their chances.
Well, they might. Well, you say fancy their chances because you're speaking in the language of combat, and they're not. They will do once we leave with no deal. Then they cease to give a monkeys about anything except their own interests. They would much rather retain trading arrangements with us, similar to what we've currently got. But you can't do that if you leave the single market and the customs union.
Because it would fall apart everything else.
Bingo. But the bottom line is, and I think the thing that would help you the most, is the simple observation, and they don't even pretend anymore, Scott. You'll recognise what I'm about to say. They don't even pretend. They don't talk to you about sunlit uplands or having your cake and eating it, or the benefits, or 350 million quid for the NHS, or what will actually improve. They don't talk about any of that. They've got three lines of defence left. One is things won't be as bad as some of the worst case scenarios suggest. The other is they'll just call you names like Ramona, or use phrases like Project Fear. And the third is still out there, which is this idea that somehow the European Union will cave at the last minute and go against what they've said they do for the last 3 years. But that just isn't going to happen.
Well, for what it's worth to everyone out there, I think whatever happens, as long as we all keep a positive head, we'll get through.
Yeah, but no one voted for as long as we keep a positive head, we'll get through. People voted for 350 million quid for the NHS, a whole new raft of unspecified laws that would somehow liberate us. They voted to get rid of unelected bureaucrats. You've got Dominic Cummings pulling the strings in Downing Street. They voted to restore power to our parliament that apparently wasn't sovereign. Turns out it was sovereign, and this shower are going to shut it down to get through stuff that the country doesn't want. I mean, if you can sit there now with your hand on your heart and say, I voted to struggle through, then I'll doff my cap to you. But you didn't, Scott.
Yeah.
You voted for promises that have already been broken, mate. And that's why I do what I do, because it's not your fault. It's the fault of the people who are still out there inflating balloons of bonkers Brexit brouhaha, talking to neurologists, insulting neurologists live on the radio. While, I mean, who knows what his medical qualifications are. 11:30 is the time. Jeremy Corbyn has delivered a speech which we will pick over the bones of imminently. Shall we summon the Usherwood? He's been on holiday. I know that you've missed him almost as much as I have. Shall we do it? Are we ready? OK. Summon the Usherwood! LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood will be joining us imminently. He just has to change back into his superhero costume and negotiate his way out of the telephone box. 25 to 12 is the time. Talking of negotiating your way out of telephone boxes, if you are in the Ramona's Project Fear, it's despicable. I don't like neurologists. I like MPs. School of thought. You're looking at. I think these two are good examples. I wish we could find another, perhaps, because I guess by dint of being Prime Minister, you are by definition divisive. But Tony Blair and John Major fought a general election against each other. sort of look back fondly upon the days when that would have been indicative of difference, as opposed to in this ludicrous binary landscape we inhabit. They're now interchangeable in the minds of Brexiters. But you know, one is a Conservative former Prime Minister, one is a Labour former Prime Minister. Both are persuaded that crashing out of the European Union with no deal would be disastrous. Their evidence for this position is, I think, for the purpose of this conversation, best distilled down to research commissioned by the actual government. Whether you're looking at Operation Yellowhammer, dated August, or whether you're looking at, updated in August, that is, of course, or whether you're looking at papers leaked today, demonstrating major concerns about the so-called British border in Ireland, whether you're looking at a detail leaked today about delays that are likely to happen in Dover, whether you're looking at concerns expressed by everybody from the National Farmers Union to the Road Haulage Association, with everything in between, about the damage, about the dangers. That's their evidence. Now, you have chosen not to believe that. You think that somehow all the evidence is wrong and they are motivated by something else. And my question, in good faith today, is what do you think they are motivated by? If not, sincere concern for the country. 0345 60 60 973. Alison's in Perth. Alison, what would you like to say?
I would just like to say that 17.4 million people voted to leave, and it's democratic to abide with that decision.
Yes. They didn't vote to be poorer.
Well, a lot of people are poor at the moment.
Yes, but they can still get poorer. They didn't vote for that, did they?
But I think a lot of it is supposition coupled with Project Fear.
Right.
I do agree that we should not leave with a no deal. There should be negotiations.
But 17.4 million people voted for that.
No, 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter whether it's no deal or not, does it? They all voted to leave.
Yes, but I mean...
so they did vote to be poorer.
These people are not stupid, as has been inferred by certain people, that we are stupid. And there's one thing, I don't pride myself on being the brain of Britain, but I'm not a stupid person.
No.
And I have been involved in my working life in negotiations as I was in sales.
Yes.
And I know that when you negotiate, you never ask for something without giving something away. That's what it's about. Yeah. And I have been involved in negotiations where where I was prepared to walk away because I could not deliver what the buyer was asking for. And I said to them, I said, look, I've given you the price. I really can't drop that anymore. And
then you walked away. And then you walked away to precisely the status quo that you...
On two occasions, these people backed down and agreed with the argument that I put forward. And I got...
What did you sell?
I was selling pest control.
Okay. And you genuinely... And this is going to sound like a patronising question, but I promise you it isn't. You genuinely think that there are parallels to be drawn between selling pest control and negotiating withdrawal from the European Union?
Negotiation. It doesn't matter what the product is.
Of course it matters.
It does matter.
Of course it matters. If you're trying to sell me an antidote for a poison... Well, you can talk, Alison, if you want, or you can listen to me.
It doesn't matter if I was selling cars or chocolate biscuits.
Well, of course it matters.
I had to negotiate.
Yes, but the negotiation is completely different according to what it is that you're selling. If you're selling antidotes to people who've already been poisoned, the negotiation is going to be very different from selling antidotes to people who haven't been poisoned. If you're selling cars to people that don't have cars, things are going to go very, very differently than they would if you were trying to sell cars to people who do have cars. And when you walk away...
James, I listen to you quite frequently, and, yes. You seem to have a penchant for tying people in knots.
It's not a penchant, Alison. It's an occupational hazard of ringing in without knowing what you're talking about. So let's go back to when you were selling pest. Let's go back to when you were selling pest control.
Let's put it this way. We're talking about the backstop in Ireland, right? Now, Switzerland is not part of the European Union, yet lorries travel in and out of Switzerland through European Union countries.
Yeah, and they get checked.
Yes, of course you do. Everybody has to get checked. When I travel...
No, at the moment, when you go from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland, you don't get checked.
Well, I don't know. I've never been to Ireland.
Well, this is
Dublin,
what
but
you
that was
mean by a
many years.
penchant for tying people in knots. You phoned in. You've used Switzerland as an example. It's fallen apart. You look ridiculous. I accept you're not stupid, and you feel this is somehow a result of my penchant for tying people in knots, rather than your utter failure to do the most cursory of research. It is funny, isn't it?
I know. I'll tell you what is
But let's
funny,
crack on. Say something else meaningless.
James, I see it as
Yes.
black and white.
I know you do.
17.4 million voted to leave the European
With no
Union.
deal.
No, that was not part of the question on the ballot paper.
Oh, well, hang on a
I
minute then. I don't understand what mandate there is for leaving with no deal then.
Well, we've had negotiations with them, which have fallen flat because they're
No,
not
they haven't. They were successful. We came up with a withdrawal agreement.
In their negotiations.
The negotiations were successful.
They are trying to punish 17.4 million.
They offered us a withdrawal agreement.
To leave.
They offered us a withdrawal agreement.
And the reason that they're trying to block us at every turn is
Right.
because the gravy train's going to hit the
Oh, I
buffers.
see, yes. So what was the withdrawal agreement then?
The withdrawal agreement was, it was that, I didn't like Theresa May's because it would still tie us to the EU.
Yes. But what was it? I mean, because from where I'm sitting, that was the result of quite lengthy negotiations.
Well, it was voted down 3 times by Parliament.
Yes, I know it was, but that's nothing to do with the EU, is it?
And she gave an awful lot more away than what, I mean,
And now I
would.
say, for example, and you say...
That we keep Northern Ireland in the EU.
Pardon?
That we keep Northern Ireland within the EU.
Now that penchant for me tying people in knots has kicked in again because you've said something else utterly ridiculous that you could have avoided by doing the most cursory of research. Shall we both giggle again now?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on.
Anyway, I stick by the democratic result. I've had to stick by
17.4 million people voted to leave with no deal, you're claiming.
Sorry?
You're claiming 17.4 million people voted to leave with no deal.
That question was not on the ballot paper.
Well,
what was on
exactly.
the ballot paper? Do you want to stay in the European Union
Yes.
or don't you want to stay?
Yes, it doesn't matter how we leave. No deal is fine.
Well, no deal was a possibility, but...
But that's what 17.4 million people voted for.
That is the last result. No, that wasn't on the ballot paper, James. I'm sorry.
That's my point. That's my point, Alison. Nobody voted to leave with no deal. 17.4 million people or 17 people. You got a lot of people that claiming they did. I'm glad, and this is evidence, as you said many times, that you're not stupid. I'm glad that you're not one of them. I guess they can only pull the wool so far down over your eyes. Where does the day go? I do not know. Grim news from Newport in South Wales, where Tata Steel has just announced it's closing its electric steel plant with the loss of up to 380 jobs. Make of that what you will. I think, you know... jobs being lost. No one celebrates that, ever. Well... sociopaths, perhaps, or people so enmeshed in tribal football-type loyalties that they cheer when the other side gets hurt or when their own side get hurt if it somehow helps prove a point. But that's the worst news imaginable outside of health-related issues for 380 families, isn't it? Think on. So... as we think on, and as we await Theo Usherwood's contribution to the programme, which I'm assured is imminent, we have summoned him. The horn is ringing out across Westminster, waiting for Theo, his little ears, to prick up in response. I believe he's here now. Theo Usherwood is on the line. Theo, did you have a nice holiday?
I had a lovely holiday, thank you, James. But
you didn't miss much. The prorogation of Parliament and the suspension of parliamentary democracy as we know it. What's going on today?
Jeremy Corbyn has been speaking this morning, setting out his stall, his opposition to what he described as a Trump deal or a Trump no-deal Brexit.
We face the threat of no deal, which would decimate industry and destroy people's jobs in those very same regions. Johnson and his right-wing cabinet don't care about the economic cost. They and their wealthy donors, they won't be the ones paying it. The price will be paid by working people in places like Salford and all around the country.
Tony Blair was also speaking this morning in central London, James, and he said that Jeremy Corbyn shouldn't go for a general election because, of course, that would mean Parliament would be prorogued for the basis that there would be to hold an election, and then that would usher in a no-deal Brexit by the back door because, of course, we'd leave on October the 31st and the election would inevitably be called for after October the 31st, November the 2nd or November the 4th, the two dates that have been talked about. Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, thinks differently. He thinks there now should be a general election.
When a government finds itself without a majority, the solution is not to undermine democracy. The solution is to let the people decide and call a general election. It is the people, not an unelected Prime Minister, who should determine our country's future.
Interestingly, Jacob Rees-Mogg, when he was speaking to LBC this morning, said that the vote tomorrow, where Conservative MPs are threatening and are likely to support a Labour motion to take control of the parliamentary agenda, which would allow Sir Keir Starmer to put forward legislation demanding that Boris Johnson seeks an extension to Article 50. Jacob Rees-Mogg said tomorrow's vote was a confidence matter. I spoke when I got to ask a question of the Prime Minister's spokesman earlier on today, and he said that it would be unreasonable, entirely unreasonable, of Conservative MPs to bind the hands of Boris Johnson when he goes to that all-important European Union, European Council summit on October the 17th by demanding that he, and forcing him through legislation to ask for an extension to Article 50. There's also a question mark about whether Boris Johnson and the government would actually abide by the law, given what given what Michael Gove said yesterday. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, clarifying and saying that every government would abide by the law, but the Prime Minister's spokesman still refusing to say whether Boris Johnson would actually adhere to a piece of legislation demanding that he seeks an extension to Article 50, simply saying that every government abides by the law.
So, forgive me for being a little bit confused. He wouldn't commit to abiding by this putative law, but he just said every government abides by the law.
Yes, but he wouldn't say, spokesman wouldn't say that he would abide by this particular law. They're just saying we need to wait and see what it actually says. So they're not committing to abiding by the law. They're just saying what Gavin Williamson said, which is that every government abides by the law. So that's the get-out for them to completely ignore Sir Keir Starmer's piece of legislation should it be successful.
Any questions about the sacking of Sajid Javid?
There's going to be no inquiry, no investigation. This is Sonia Khan, who, of course, is accused by Dominic Cummings, the de facto chief of staff inside Number 10, of having unauthorised contact with another former advisor, I should say, of Philip Hammond, Poppy Trowbridge, former Sky News correspondent. And Dominic Cummings went through her phone and found that she hadn't declared that telephone conversation at the first time of asking, and therefore called down to the police guard room and asked for an armed police officer to come into the room and escort Sonia Khan off the Number 10 estate.
Theo Usherwood, many thanks. Can we think of a phrase to describe Dominic Cummings? I'm struggling a bit this morning. But possibly something that rhymes with unelected bureaucrat or something like that. I don't know. Any thoughts?
The question mark, one of the phrases that's been used with in sentences with Dominic Cummings' name is evil genius.
Yes.
Of course, it remains to be seen, the genius bit remains to be seen in terms of whether he can get to October the 31st and take the UK out of the European Union. Previous geniuses, of course, who've worked inside Number 10 include Andy Coulson. He went to prison. Nick Timothy was another evil genius, or just a genius.
He ended up on the Telegraph, which is arguably worse.
And then he managed to blow up his own career, Theresa May's career, and the Conservative majority in the House of Commons.
Indeed. 11:55 is the time. Good to have you back, Theo Usherwood. We may speak to you again before close of play today, but he will, of course, be popping up on various other programmes throughout the course of the afternoon. Sheila Fogarty with you at 1. And the inimitable Eddie Mair the inimitable Sheila Fogarty. We're all inimitable in our own inimitable ways. It's not a word you should say too often, actually. It's a tricky one. But Eddie will be with you at 4. 11:55 is the time. A couple more calls on this. Interesting, but not that fruitful, I think we could agree. You don't know why they're doing it, because you do deep down. They're doing it out of genuine understanding and concern for the country. But many people still aren't quite ready to acknowledge that. And that's fine. But it won't be soon. We are rather running out of time. Janet's in Wimbledon. Janet, what made you pick up the phone?
Never. Hello, darling. Great show.
Thank you.
None of your shows have ever genuinely scared me like today has.
Oh, sorry.
I'm genuinely frightened. I've just come off a paediatric night shift, which I really enjoyed. I don't know if the public are aware of this, but it costs now, today, £56,000 in loans to become a nurse.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, to answer your question, I feel that these MPs, our elected MPs, are putting their head above the parapet because they know that you can't sacrifice the NHS like you can rat poison. I can't believe that woman came on the phone and did that. My slabber is aghast. I just can't believe it.
Garsted, I think, to be pedantic.
Yes.
About, yes.
What's going to happen, okay, is that we know now that only those that can afford to become a nurse can become a nurse. You either have to remortgage your house, or but there is no other way really, or you have to have rich parents. We know this, right?
I guess. All right. For the purposes of the argument, we'll continue. But I could argue with
when
you.
When we get specialists coming on the phone to alert the public what effect Brexit is going to have on the NHS, and he's ridiculed by
ugly,
people
wasn't it?
in the party.
You're referring to Jacob Rees-Mogg insulting the consultant neurologist who contributed to Operation Yellowhammer. There's no nice way of dressing that up.
It makes you want to weep. It really, really does.
I think it was a new low in public life, actually.
What's going to happen, right, is that, and I can tell you this from someone who's a second year, I'm literally 4 placements away from graduating as a psychiatric nurse.
Gosh.
Now, what's going to happen is fewer and fewer people are going to be able to afford to become nurses. So who have we got left? Nurses from abroad. What will Brexit do to the process of bringing those nurses into the country? Now, you can say what you like about Jeremy Corbyn. He knows this, and that's why he said, if you vote Labour, we will bring back the bursary. And you know what? You will have so many people coming into nursing because now they can afford it. So then we can have British nurses. I tell you what, we can't sacrifice the NHS for Brexit. We can't do it.
What are the staffing levels like currently? How is business as we speak?
It's frightening. I bank on the NHS so that I can top up my loans so that I don't have to live on the street, basically, because the loan that I get pays my rent and half my utilities. That's all it pays, okay? Yeah. So I could use the gas or the electricity. So I have to bank, okay, to do that. Now, I've been in a hospital where they had to close a whole bay of a ward because there wasn't enough bank staff to actually nurse on that ward, okay? This is happening right here, right now, in our country. Okay, and if you think Brexit is going to make that work that better, you're delusional. You've got to be, unless you're actually doing it as a living, you don't understand. We're stockpiling medicines for a reason. Okay, it is frightening. It's terrifying. When I graduated,
and when you hear Jacob Rees-Mogg describing people drawing upon their professional experience, like you, as cultivating Project Fear, and he'll call you a Ramona.
It makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
It makes me want to cry. And when I graduate, it frightens me. And me and thousands of other students that graduate this year, next year, it frightens me, the NHS that I would go into. And if it gets any worse, it's already on its knees. If it gets any worse, I will have to go into the private sector because there won't be an NHS for me to go into, and that frightens me because
I hear you, and as I say many, many times, nobody wants that. No one would derive any pleasure at all from seeing that, but you are living your life. You are drawing on your experiences and reacting to the evidence in front of you. The alternative, of course, is to stick your fingers in your ears, close your eyes, doff your cap, tug your forelock.